And sometimes she'll be like, you make the decision. Like, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? You know, whatever. Like, I don't know. I mean, then I pick 10 places. She says no to all of them.
Well, you know what the trick is? I'm going to give you a trick to wrap this up. So when you go out with Karen, she's like, I'm not sure. Because women sometimes, and again, I'm not being stereotyped, but this just happens. And I work with a whole office of women.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get them to make decisions on where to eat.
Sure.
So what you do is you get into the car. And she says, instead of saying to her, where do you want to go? And she's like, I'm not sure, whatever. And you say, honey, I've got a place selected for dinner. Guess where it is? And she's going to say, it's Brico. And you're like, exactly. And you drive right to Brico.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
I'm going to do that.
Right. You do that, and then she'll agree with it. And she'll,
that's funny.
Yeah, it's good.
That's funny.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Today we have Dennis House. Dennis, thank you for coming in.
Great to see you, Rich.
Thank you. So this is, I don't know, our 6th or 7th episode of this podcast that I started, and I'm like, the joke I have is every asshole has a podcast now, right? Like it's sort of like we all want to be, we all want to be Dennis House, and have, you have the statewide audience, and so everybody, wants to do this. But the reason why I did it is I wanted to sort of, talk to people that I know about life, and I was going to call it I Got a Guy, but there's a trademark for I Got a Guy.
Interesting.
So I went with I'll Call My Guy. So I have that trademark.
I'll call my guy.
But it's the similar concept, you're Italian, right?
Yes.
So it's like I got a guy, right? Like that's like a sort of like my friend's Italian manager, like I got a guy, but I'll call my guy, which is what you do when you got a guy. You say, hey Dennis, do you have a guy for this? You're like, yeah, I'll call my guy. And sort of the theme of it is, and we talk a little bit about your background and whatnot, but I want to talk about journalism and all of that, but the importance of relationships and how relationships sort of frame the or how important they are to being a journalist. And you and I have interfaced as a journalist and somebody providing you with information, but how people I think don't realize how sacred that relationship is, at least when you're providing information to a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm relying, if it's off the record or I'm giving you background or something, that I'm relying on you to know that you will not burn that source, because you have to, if you are subpoenaed, you have to say I'm protected by the First Amendment, because there could be something someone gives you that they can lose their job. They can be arrested. I mean, right? I mean, let's jump right into that.
Well, first of all, Rich, thank you for having me here. An honor to be here.
Oh, thanks.
And I love podcasts. I think I love to listen to them in the car. And I've learned so much from them.
I love them.
So I will
listen to the Billy Grant one. You'll like that. When I get Billy Grant on here, that's a great one.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah. So
from Brico. So in terms of journalism and sources, yes, I would go to jail for a source. And I have told people that you can trust me. I'm not going to reveal it. I've been in this market now for 32 years. Right. And I've been doing this for a little bit more than 32. I was in Illinois and Michigan before this. So I have a lot of tipsters who call me with things, email me with things, and I never, ever reveal their sources and reveal their names or anything like that. I never would. And so that's why I think people trust me. I think that's why they turn to me at night, because they know that I've probably checked out some things, made sure the facts are correct. And I think those who have met with me or worked with me as a confidential source know they can trust me.
Right. Okay. And so so you're from your background, you're a Massachusetts guy, so you're a New Englander.
Yes,
right?
native New Englander.
Native New Englander. I see you went to tell me about your folks. Were you raised in an intact family? Were they together?
Yes. My dad was an engineer for Raytheon.
Okay.
He worked on missiles when I was a kid, and then later the Aegis system, which is a radar system, but he could never talk about it. There were no pictures of work because it was all a government contracted
thing. That must have been cool
thing.
As a kid, like my dad works at secret stuff. Right?
Yes. So after he passed away, I did find a couple of pictures that were taken of him at work, not doing anything.
No. Right.
But he was he was on the phone. He took me on a business trip once to Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, and we were at a Navy base. And I dropped him off, and I took the rental car, and I drove off. And as I was driving out of the base, I saw this gigantic aircraft carrier. It was really close, right? And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'd never seen one before. So I got out and took a picture of it. And it wasn't too long before I was pulled over on the base.
So when you're snapping pictures?
Yeah, they said, you can't take pictures in the base. I said, oh, I didn't know. I was in high school or college. I don't remember. But it was but you learn, right? My mom is she's still around. My dad passed away a couple years ago, but my mother is still around, and she is a realtor. Just retired actually recently at age 82. She was selling houses till she was like 81
So
or
when
82.
you were a child, she was a realtor.
She went into real estate when I was in middle school, junior high, we called it back then.
Okay.
And she knew everyone in town, and but she recently moved to Florida and wanted to kind of step back. But she was another one I learned a lot of relationship advice from, because she would sell houses to grandchildren of her original clients 40 years ago.
So you saw that as a
yes, that people like familiarity, people like a familial feeling. And so I think if you can get that kind of trust, that's a great thing. So I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston. People who grew up there will always tell you it's the greatest place on earth. And it's cool because you go back there and the town center is great. There's this.
Where's Norwood? Orient the audience as to where Norwood is.
It's like southwest a little bit of Boston. You're about 12 miles outside the city. You take the T in. You can take the bus. You can take the train in. Either way,
so it's a Boston suburb.
It's a Boston suburb. And my great grandparents. I'm a fourth generation Norwoodite. My great grandfather first moved there after he had emigrated from Italy, and so and then my grandfather was born in the U.S. and then my mom was born in Norwood, and I was born in Norwood.
And House was the family name?
Well, House is my dad, so he's not Italian.
Oh, I see.
So that's the other side.
So what's your mom?
My grandfather's name was Crescenzo Culli.
Oh, okay. You couldn't get more Italian than that.
Couldn't get more Italian than that, yeah. But Norwood has the church is still there where 4 generations of my family went, and
there's 2 funeral homes.
Went to funerals. There's 2 funeral homes.
Right.
Yeah. The diner downtown has been there since
Norwood Diner.
Yep, the Norwood Diner. I actually think it's called the Town Diner. The Norwood Town Diner is the official name. But I brought Kara there recently. We moved there. She'd never been. There's a bowling alley that my grandfather used to go to as a kid. My elementary schools are there, and I still have some friends in town, so it's a cool place.
And the diner is just good stick to your ribs kind of.
Yes, and right around the corner there's another restaurant. Within that corner there are 2 restaurants that have been there well over 50, 60, 70 years, and my grandmother worked at one, and so it's pretty cool. The Norwood Theater is still there. It's just really a cool town. So
you did that. So your mom's doing that. Your dad is working outside of Boston for Raytheon?
Yeah, he worked in. We worked in a bunch of different plants. Sudbury was one of them, and Waltham was another over the years. So.
And siblings?
I have one sibling who lives in Florida, and he's a brother 2 years younger.
2 years younger.
Yeah.
All right. So you're a very traditional family in a suburb of Boston.
Yes.
And hardworking parents, and early on, anything sort of spark your interest with regard to journalism at all, or is this something that happened later in life?
I think I always had an interest in it. I remember when we moved when I was about 7 to a new neighborhood in Norwood, and if you left Norwood, it was a big deal. So it was a new neighborhood in Norwood, and the houses were all new, and our road wasn't paved for a while. And we used to fall off our bikes because of the stones or whatever it was in the road. And so we got a petition together and brought it to town hall, and the road got paved. Whether we had anything to do with it, who knows, or whether we were going to do it eventually. But the road could get paved. So I kind of learned the power of being able to get people together and do things. And then I had a paper route, and I delivered the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe. And I remember...
So you're delivering the news at 8 years old.
I was delivering the news, yeah. It was through probably middle school, and my mom would, on rainy days, she'd take us out in the station wagon with all the papers in the back. But my brother and I would pretty much use bikes.
You just said something. I got to put a pin in this. The station wagon. You're obsessed with station wagons. I know this. And
I love station wagons.
No, but I see them sometimes, and I text them to you.
You do.
Classic ones. But I mean, again, maybe I'm playing dime store psychologist or something. But there's something interesting at that age. Paper routes is a tough job.
Yes.
Right. You have to get up bright and early, and and the people all stink. Right. They're all calling in you didn't bring it close enough.
Yeah.
It's got to be just
right.
Or it gets wet.
Yeah.
And you got to go back out. And usually you're at school already, so your mom's got to go or somebody's got to go bring it. And then your mom's taking you out in the station wagon. It's sort of interesting, that you're
on rainy days. Yes,
at a young age, you're doing the hard work to deliver the news, and now look at you. It's I don't know. It's kind of a neat thing. I see a parallel there.
Yeah, so I was always interested in news. We watched the news.
Who was your local news guy then?
So it's interesting because my grandma lived with us for most of my life, and she was really into Channel 4,
Is it
which
the
was
NBC affiliate?
WBC. WBC was the NBC affiliate
Okay.
at the time. I think it's CBS now.
Okay.
And my parents were more into Channel 5. So that was kind of like the younger, up and coming
Oh, I see.
news station. And they're the number one station. So I grew up watching news. And I remember certain news things over the years, like, the resignation. I remember coming up from school and my mother was watching the Watergate hearings.
So you're probably what, you're in your 50s?
I just turned 60.
60, all right.
60,
okay.
yeah.
So early 70s.
Yeah, and so that was in the 70s. And then, I remember coming home from high school the day that Reagan was shot. And he had been, and just watching that coverage and how fascinating that was. Because if you remember, they didn't think he was shot at first.
That's right.
First was shots were fired and a few other people were injured. And then it didn't come out till later that he was actually
Right,
shot.
they threw him into the limo, and then the Secret Service landed on top of him.
Yeah.
And then he got up, and he's like, "I'm having trouble breathing." And they brought him to George Washington Hospital.
Yes.
I remember. Yeah.
So I remember watching that. I remember watching World Series and things like that. The Red Sox made the World Series in '75, and I just remember watching news. And I remember in high school, my parents were. And politically, it's interesting because they were kind of like, Kennedy Democrats,
Right.
when I was younger, and then they became like big fans of Reagan. Yeah,
Okay.
I think Jimmy Carter kind of
The
turned
Blue
to
Dog Democrats.
Yeah, I think that what happened was, and I remember they complained about the economy a lot. The interest rates were high,
Right,
and
right.
unemployment was high, and then the hostage situation in Iran. And I remember one morning vividly, there was a failed attempt to rescue the hostages, and a helicopter crashed.
That's right, yeah.
And I believe all the American servicemen were killed. I remember my parents watching this and just really complaining about, that there needed to be they needed a new
Change.
approach, new
And
change.
so Reagan comes in with his Morning in America,
So he came in, and he won Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So I don't think my parents were the only ones who kind of switched
Blue
over.
Dog Democrats, right? They carried
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, in high school, I wrote a little bit for the school newspaper. And that was kind of interesting. I didn't do too much for it, but a little bit. And I went to college, and
Yeah, you went to. I read Assumption, right?
yeah,
Where
went to
was that? Where's
Assumption
that?
College, which is now Assumption University in Worcester.
Oh, Worcester. That's right. Okay.
And I had the interest in TV, but it was not like I was busy with like having fun in college and learning other things. So I can't say I was like, I can't wait to graduate and do this. I was looking forward to doing it someday, but there wasn't like an urgency. And then I graduated from college, and I just wanted to take kind of a break. So my friends and I had a place down the Cape that we rented, and we bartended and waited tables. And I went to Florida for a little bit and did the same thing.
This is after graduation.
After graduation,
So you're 22,
while I was
23?
sending out resumes, and it was very tough to break into TV. And I didn't quite know how to do it. Then I came back and I got an internship at a station in Providence. And the rest is history.
So you get an internship. How old are you? 25?
That was probably 23, maybe.
23.
Yeah, I graduated from college. I was 21. So it was probably like 2 years later, and I came back and I got an internship.
Unpaid?
It was unpaid, yeah.
Right,
And
so-
I was taking some graduate courses at Emerson. I don't have my master's, but I
Right.
was enrolled where I was
Right.
taking some.
And
some
you're
graduate
living
courses.
home?
I was living at home, and Providence is only like 30 miles from Norwood.
And what's the station there?
WPRI.
And is that NBC affiliate?
It was at the time it was ABC. It's now CBS.
CBS. Okay, so
And-
and where are you in the newsroom? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so I was in the newsroom, and I was just the first day I walked in, I was dressed like a news anchor when I went in there.
With the
Like
vest
I always had a tie on and stuff, and I was sort of like, someday I'm going to get my break. I didn't know how it worked. Of course, they're not going to give some 23-year-old guy with no experience, bad Boston accents. They're not going to put him on TV.
Was your accent thicker then?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So I learned, but I learned, Rich, just how to like put together news, and I learned to love it. And this one day, the weekend anchor, who was a mentor of mine, and we're still friends to this day, Ted Wayman. He's a reporter in Boston.
Still there?
Yeah, still there. Well, he's in Boston now, but he said, you should work the weekends. He goes, if you work the weekends, you're going to get to do a lot. No one's around. We're short-staffed. You'll get to go out with the photographer. You get to actually ask the questions, the whole bit. I said, okay, done. So I did it. And it was great. This one day, I was with a photographer, and there was a fire on this dentist office had a summer office on an island in Narragansett Bay. And we went down there, and we because we were Channel 12, they took us out in the boat. We went out there and we got this great video. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I loved it. And I remember Senator Claiborne Pell was on a story one day that I got to ask him a couple of questions. So, all these things. And, I kind of wish that cell phones were around then because I don't have any like pictures of stuff like that. Well, because you didn't, who brought a camera and said, hey, let's take a picture together. No one did that back
and then you'd have to go get it developed
and all that.
Yeah,
so I have some, but certainly not like, these moments. And then I sent out my resume and I ended up getting a job in Manchester, New Hampshire at WMUR TV. And I worked behind the scenes there. I was on the assignment desk. And after being there a couple of weeks, somebody left and I became the assignment manager.
And still not a face for TV.
Not on
but
TV.
It's like behind the scenes.
But production. I was learning how the whole operation worked and I was making connections and relationships. And then at night I would stay late and I would go out with a reporter and I would watch what they do. And then I would get in front of the camera, do my own little stuff. And I put together a tape. And
that's called, the reporters go out, you put together a package, right?
They call it packages. Very good. Very good. And so then I did that and sent it out.
And now are you paid
yeah.
So that's a paid one, and you're moved to New Hampshire.
I wasn't paid a lot, but
probably you're like barely getting by. Probably, right?
I think it was 15,000, and I think it was higher, like 13,000. When I became a manager, it was 15,000.
Wow. And you get a little apartment in Manchester or something.
So I actually lived with my grandmother for a little bit because she lived up there.
Oh, okay.
My other grandmother lived in Haverhill, Mass. So I lived with her until I decided, because I didn't know the job would work out. Who knows, right? And then I met a reporter there who had just moved in from out of state, and he needed a roommate. So the two of us got an apartment in Manchester, which was great.
And where's your accent at this point?
So my accent was pretty bad. In fact, my news director, Miles Resnick, who ended up writing a book on TV news, was very helpful to me. And he said, he goes, you're going to have to lose the accent. You're going to have to really work on that. And he goes, you need a haircut because I had like a mullet, and it was long. And
we were in production then, right?
So I did both. So I really worked on the accent.
And would you use a coach or did you work on it yourself?
Yeah. So I didn't really have a coach, but I had as I was taking a class at Emerson, I asked the professor about it. And he gave me some advice on how to do it. He's like, well, he goes, some say that if you practice talking in a Southern accent, that counterbalances a New England accent. So every so often I'll say a word that's kind of weird.
Oh,
and people are like, are you from the South? I'm like, no, I don't know. But when I went to the Midwest, so I sent out like about 30 tapes. And then I learned how the business worked, Rich, too, because I thought, I'll just go to Boston and work my way up the ladder. It doesn't work that way. You have to go to smaller markets all across the country and do it. So I got a couple job offers, and I took the one in Rockford, Illinois, which is about 90 miles west of downtown Chicago.
Okay.
Second biggest city in the state, at least it was. And it was great. It was like a microcosm because there were 3 stations, 4 stations, Fox too. And we all did news. I was hired as the weekend anchor. And so I learned how to...
So that was your first time on TV?
My first time on TV.
From intern in Providence, small-time production in Manchester, and now you're the weekend anchor.
Now I'm the weekend anchor at the ABC station WREX in Rockford, Illinois. And I was super excited to get that job. I remember I moved out from I went to my parents' house, picked up some stuff, and I drove out during a snowstorm. And I'd never been to well, I guess I'd been through the Midwest, but I certainly hadn't spent any time there. And then when you get to Chicago, it's gigantic. And I thought, Rockford must be, somewhat sizable. And you get there and it's like a little tiny city. But there was no internet then, right? So I wanted to know what Rockford, Illinois looked like.
You went to the library.
I went to the library and the encyclopedia. There wasn't much on it, right? So this was a big surprise. I moved there sight unseen. I had spoken to the news director on the phone, but there was no Zoom. He hadn't even seen me. Nothing. Yeah. He had my tape, and that was it. And that first weekend, I had to work. And I remember thinking to myself, after it was all over, like, I can't believe these poor people. I'm their news guy now, And
but that's an interesting concept too, right? If you just think about when just the guy has a tape and just your phone, he didn't get to size you up on Zoom. There's nothing. There's no record of you anywhere because there's no Google. There's nothing.
Yeah, he called some references.
Yeah. And references always say good things.
I think I was
because you gave them good references.
I think it was a good hire. I've always, knock on wood, I'm healthy. I don't take a lot of sick time, and so I went in there. I was a good employee. I worked hard, and I got some pretty good stories. In fact, one of my big exclusives when I was in Rockford was with Ronald Reagan. And it's kind of funny because when I hadn't been there long and he was coming back, he was then the former president. and he was coming back to Rockford to see his boyhood home, which had been turned into a museum.
Oh, that's right. He's from Rockford.
He's from Dixon, Illinois.
Oh, Dixon, right.
You know, he actually was born in Tampico, Illinois, and then but ended up in, Dixon was his boyhood home. And so we went to Dixon, and there was, they had turned the whole thing into a museum. They restored the house. And they told us, they said, the president's not going to talk to anyone. He's just going to go in. And so you can have to stand behind the yellow tape and the whole bit. And I thought to myself, well, this is kind of disappointing, right? And so I decided, let's go to the backyard. So I said to the photographer, I said, what guy is not going to want to see his childhood backyard?
Where he played,
right? So we went back there and we waited, and sure enough, he came out.
And he had lighter Secret Service, probably, right? Because he was not the president at the time.
He had it, but it wasn't like, the house was pretty sealed off. I will recall that. I mean, there was a lot of, presence there with local police and Secret
Right, but
Service.
usually, like the president, you can't get within.
Oh, totally. Especially now. And it gets,
layers and layers and layers.
Yeah, and understandably, I understand. So he walked out the backyard and he walked around, and I asked him a couple of questions. And looking back on it, I kind of, this is something I tell young journalists. One of the most important things about telling a story is getting how people feel about it.
Right.
It's not necessarily the facts. You can report the facts, right? You don't need them to recite the facts. This is something controversial, right? So but because I was young and I didn't have much experience, I thought I need to ask this guy some hard-hitting questions or I'm going to be laughed at. So I asked him about Saddam Hussein, and I asked him about the budget, and it's just boring junk that I probably shouldn't have. What I should have said was how does it feel to be walking around your backyard after 70 years?
Right, what were you thinking, 70 years ago?
Yeah,
to hear that you'd ever be the leader of the free world, right?
I didn't. I asked hard questions. And so I learned that because I'm like, the story was okay. I got this exclusive with Ronald Reagan, but I didn't ask him anything of any substance, right? He's like, I think the Democrats should be doing X, Y, Z. Of course. Yeah. They were standard answers. And so sometimes that's a good lesson. If you have if you're sitting down with someone for an interview, you can take your time with it and you can pick your questions. You can get to the point eventually. But if someone's walking and talking, you need to ask the important questions right off the bat. And that's what I should have done. But I learned.
All right. But could you tell me, though, when you call back your news director, right? Because obviously you can't text them like Reagan's coming.
Yeah.
And you say, wait till you see what I got for you. That must have been a moment. Because I know from dealing with the press in some of my cases, especially the younger reporters, right? With you're just... You've been doing this so long, you're unflappable. But you get a young reporter who's looking to go from Hartford to Philly, right? Because they're always looking at the next one, right?
Yeah.
And you give them something, and they are just like, my news director is going to shit when they hear that. And they're texting them. So tell me about that call, because I know it had to have been a huge deal.
So looking back on it, I must have called from a payphone,
right?
Because
there
were no cell phones,
right?
But we were 20 minutes away, 30 minutes away. So maybe we just went back and told them in person. I don't really remember, but they were pretty excited that we got Ronald Reagan, because no one else had any sound.
You're like, I got an exclusive.
We're the only ones who had sound with him, and
oh my God,
which was great.
No, but I mean, how new were you there? Like 2 weeks in? I was
maybe 6 months or something like that.
Still, you bring back the former president?
Because it's interesting. My first day at WREX was Reagan's last day in office. I remember that because they sent me there to Dixon to interview people who knew him.
Right. So what do you think?
And he had some friends and all that. And, what do you, and there was one of his boyhood friends had saved all these pictures of him. So he was a lifeguard. Reagan was a lifeguard in Dixon, Illinois, on that river, the Rock River. And, but the day that he came to visit his house, his school teacher was there, and she was like 100, she was pretty old, because he was old.
Wow.
But so I interviewed her as well. But it was a fun day. And then, the thing is with Rockford, it was such a small staff, so we got to do a lot. So I did the daily stuff like the shootings and the fires, and farming was a big thing there. So we did a lot of farm stories. And then one day the sports guy was sick. I ended up having to cover for him Monday Night Football. I went to the Bears game.
Oh, cool.
Back in the day, they would let the reporters walk around the sidelines. So I was walking on the sidelines with, I remember Jim Belushi was there because he hung out. And I got to ask Mike Ditka, he was the coach, asked him a question in the locker room. And again, where are the pictures? I don't have any pictures.
But you have good memories. But how is so how does it work then? How does journalism work then? So you're in a new market, and obviously there's production assistants and producers that are giving you information. They're putting it in the teleprompter and you're reading it. But there's a component of it, like what you do now, that's not just delivering the news, but also investigating and gathering information to help your story. And of course, with 32 years under your belt in this market, like, or been doing it 30, or however long you've been here forever, you know you have a whole list of people you
Yeah.
can just text and say, hey, who do I talk to on this, or what do I do on this? But that takes decades to build. How do you do that in Rockford with no internet, right? No texting, and you don't know a soul? How do you develop those stories? Or did you not do it then? You were just delivering at the time?
Well, you had to get some facts. And sometimes, most stations had a clip file. So, for instance,
What is that? What's a clip file?
A clip file would be old newspaper clippings of stories, of major stories. So that, because nowadays, let's say, we covered the Michelle Draconis trial, right? And all we have to do is go online and we can find every fact out about it.
Oh, yeah. What do they call that now when you have like old stuff from the not clip
archives.
Archives, yeah, the archives, right?
So,
yeah.
But like everything right there online, right?
Right, you can find anything you want.
Any
2
piece
seconds
of information.
Yeah.
But 30, 40 years ago, it was different. We had what was known as a clip file, and
so
you'd go.
It would be an actual folder.
Yeah, you'd go to the file cabinet and you'd look up doulos. And you'd, presumably it'd be pretty thick, right? And you'd look at all these stories, and if you wanted to look at past facts, you'd have to look past. And again, this was probably someone else's work, right? And then you'd have to go see the stories that we did, and
and you'd have to go to like the engineer would have to pull them out of the archive,
pull them out of the archives, and put them on a machine.
What was was it like a huge like reel like?
Well, it depends. Like for instance, let's use the Kennedy assassination, which was really the first breaking news, is one of the first things. That was done on film. And if you notice, if you watch the coverage from that day, there are almost no like live shots, right, where they go to like Parkland Hospital.
Right.
It just didn't happen. Or like, there was no instant video of what happened because it was film. And along that motorcade route that day, from what I've read, the networks would have people planted along with like bags. They were called grapefruit bags because they were like yellow mesh. And they would say CBS News or NBC News or so. And somebody would take the film out and they would hand it, or maybe sometimes even toss it out of the motorcade to that person who would put it in the bag and run it back to the station where it had to be developed.
Oh my gosh.
So it was really a complex process. And there was no live coverage of like
anything.
I mean, there was radio coverage of the president driving through, but when he was assassinated,
they literally ran to telephones and they had to call into the news station. Right?
Nobody was covering that live because it just wasn't how news worked back then. I believe that because they would be live, and we're waiting for film to get back. We're waiting for the film to be developed. And it's interesting because if you know the Kennedy assassination, you know that the biggest piece of evidence is this Zapruder film.
Mm-hmm.
And this dressmaker was just with his home video camera.
Yeah, one of the first ones out. And he's like, I'm going to show my
whole
kids.
Assassination.
Right.
And so reporters found out about it, and they took him to, I believe, the ABC station down there. They brought him and they said,
give it up.
to get it developed. And he was going to get it developed, and they came out and they said, we don't do that kind of thing. We can't develop that. And so they even interviewed him. They had him on the air while they were in, they say, we're developing your film right now. Well, they weren't because they couldn't.
Right.
So this was one of those things that I think was just, this is how it's grown. And nowadays, we can talk about, some of the big news that's happened recently. But for instance, Trump and the Supreme Court, right? That decision is instantaneous. We get it right away. It's all over
Twitter, everything.
But back in the day, when you were in a trial, sometimes there would be someone inside the room, and the judge would say guilty, and that person would be at the doorway, and they'd have a guilty and a non-guilty sign, and they'd go to the window and they'd put it out, and the people outside would know guilty. That's how they found out. It was pretty crude.
Wow.
Because before cameras in the courtroom and all that. So it's really, news has developed, and in some ways it's easier, but in some ways it's not as good.
But to that point, on Rockville, how do you then how do you meet people just going to bars, restaurants, getting introduced to people? How do you develop contacts?
I've met a lot of people over the years.
Right.
I absolutely love living in Connecticut. 32 years this summer.
Okay.
And I've made a lot of friends. I've made a lot of acquaintances. I've met a lot of people. I'm sure there are people who don't like me out there, but I've done stories on, I'll tell you a really funny story.
Yeah.
if you know an attorney named Andrew Crumby.
Crumby, African American guy.
Yes.
Yes.
So
I represented his wife, his ex-wife.
Oh, okay. Well, so it's okay that we talk about it, but
Yeah.
an amazing guy.
Yeah,
But when I was brand new at Channel 3, I did a story on state police troopers, and he was he was relatively young at the time, and it was on how they had state troopers at construction sites on the highway, and everybody had to pay for them. And it was a tax thing, right? And so I sent the photographer out. I said, I need some more video. So he went out to a construction site, came back and said, you're not going to believe what I got. I got this guy, this state trooper, sleeping in his car.
Oh, gosh.
And I felt really badly about it. And I'm like, well, it's not really it's just a sample, right? This one guy. We don't know if they all do this, right? This is terrible. And so the news director's like, it changes the whole story, the whole bit. So anyway, he got in some trouble at work, presumably, all these things happen. This was like 93, maybe 94. So I always felt badly about him. It was in the paper. It became a big deal. The Hartford Courant picked it up.
He's a former trooper. Is that him?
Yeah. So I'm getting to the point of the story, but I always felt badly about it, that this guy got in trouble because of my story, Did I do anything wrong? No. But I still felt badly about it because he's a human being.
Right.
He
probably has a family.
He didn't get suspended, but something happened where he didn't get overtime or something like that. And so anyway, he became an officer and became a trooper. And 2 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I get a call late at night from a good friend of mine. He says, can you come over for a drink? I have someone I want you to meet.
Oh, God.
And I said, God, it's like 11:30. I'm in bed, I can't. He's like, oh, come on. I said, dude, I got to be up early. I just can't go over your house for a drink. Who's this guy? And he's like, hold on, I'm going to put him on the phone. So this guy gets on the phone and he goes, Dennis' house? I said, yes. He goes, this is Andrew Crumby. And I paused for a second. And
he was going to kill me.
He's like, do you know who I am? I said, I do. He said, you used to be a state trooper. 28 years ago, I did this story. And he started laughing. They had a big laugh at it. And he goes, listen, I hated you for years. He goes, I just was like, but we met right after that. I didn't go over that night, but we met soon and we've become good friends.
Oh, that's funny.
So, because, and you can laugh about it now, right? It was one of those things that I didn't necessarily do it, but stories have impacts on people, and you do have to be very, very careful. There's I have a friend who lost his son in a crash, who his daughter learned about it on the news.
Oh, gosh.
Another station put the car there with the license plate, and it's not something we do. And there was an accident recently where somebody died, and same thing. It was on another station. You could tell whose car it was if you knew, and we didn't do that. So I just think we have tremendous responsibility out there, Rich, to make sure that the stories are accurate and that they're sensitive, and that we don't.
And that's, I think, as I observe these things, it's changed since the Rockford, Illinois days, because the news is not a 24-hour cycle anymore.
Yeah,
it's a second cycle, right? It's seconds.
It is.
And so there's a rush to be first, and so you have to be, at least, tell me if I'm wrong. You really have to be cautious because you can get played. You can put something out there. It's just working so quickly, right? I mean,
well, some stations put stuff out right away, and we don't. And I'm always very careful because you just don't know, right? You have to make sure it's accurate. You have to make sure it really did happen, and lives are impacted. So you have to be very, very careful what you put out there. So we always try to trust, verify, and everything else.
Well, and the relationship, I don't know if it's the same. I'd be curious, somebody who studies these things. I know that the relationship, at least my parents and grandparents and your parents had with their news anchor was like a priest. Yeah. I mean, like Walter Cronkite. I mean, this is the guy that, and again, the political climate has changed, and there's all of this issue of, who's telling the truth and politicians saying things. But, like that person came to you, they would trust him more than they trust their relatives. I mean, it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And I think some of that still was there.
I really enjoy meeting people. I really do. Like, people come up to me in the store or wherever, and they'll be like, hey, I'm sorry to bother them. I'm like, no, it's never a bother.
Right. It's my job.
So I really enjoy meeting people and talking to people. And most people are nice. You get some complaints along the way. I feel really badly. Yesterday I was in a bagel shop and I had ordered something, and my son texted me and is like, so I said to the woman, I said, listen, I know I just paid for this, but he doesn't want the locks anymore. Can I swap it out? And, it was, I felt badly because there was a line behind me, and this guy came up to me. He's like, is this going to be on the news tonight? Just like, and, I had a hat on and I didn't look like me maybe. So I thought, whatever, but, and I felt really badly because I wanted to go talk to him afterwards, but he was gone. Right. So he probably thinks I'm some jerk who was like, but I did laugh about it. So, like meeting people, it's amazing, and everyone's got a story to tell. I find people really interesting.
But in terms of the building that trust, again, I don't know how it impacts the millennials and the Gen Zers, but when I was younger, I was your affiliate. I lived in the West Haven and Hamden areas, so I was a WTNH guy. So it was Jeff Fox and Keith Koontz and Janet Peckenbach and Nyberg. Those were my people, right? Yeah. So as a kid, I remember, and they were revered, and people that brought you that you feel that like I could hand them $1,000 and they would safekeep it for me. I really felt that. Now it's sort of different because you get news from so many different sources, right? I get some from Twitter, you get it from Facebook, and of course, there's a whole danger in doing that because these organizations cultivate feeds sometimes. There's books on this stuff trying to that are just echo chambers for you. And it's not pure news per se. It's opinion, and it's trying to influence, and you have to be very careful with that. But yeah, I remember that those folks just being it's so important to the family because what they said meant something, and there was no agenda other than the news.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful because there's a difference between opinion shows and news.
Right.
And you've got the spectrum of, Hannity on one side, D'Amato on the other. And, if you rely on either one of those two for all your information, you're going to have a skewed view of something, right? And it's not always, those two because they're on different sides and they take a viewpoint. They're not going to.
Yeah, but they're like partial entertainment.
Yeah,
and
they
commentary.
may not always be accurate. And
well, I mean, look what happened to Fox, right? They got creamed, right? They got hit for they had to pay almost $1 billion.
Yeah, and they're very careful now.
Right? Yeah, they cut away with Trump. I saw recently they cut away. They don't. They're
that
not.
Took a lot because they now they're liable and there's I had someone who called me not too long ago. Well, this was actually when. It must have been when Trump first became president, and said, they said, do you know that Barack Obama's mother-in-law is on the White House pension? I said, well, I've never heard that. Why would she be? Well, it was on the news last night. I saw him look it up. I didn't see it anywhere, right? And I said, where'd you get this from? And she said, it was Newsmax.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I don't know that was a news program. There was, somebody said that, Well, she lived in the White House, they said, for all these years. I said, she may have lived in the White House. I don't know. But I don't think she's getting a White House pension. I said, no one else is, and she's like, well, there's some media thing. No one wants to touch this story. I'm like, I don't think that's the case, right? And, is there media bias out there in, places here and there? Absolutely. It's interesting. There are a couple of good books out there, but, the national media has always been headquartered in New York. So they tend to have a New York view. And so that kind of, not everybody will. I remember once there was some criticism of a New York Times columnist about gas guzzling cars and the whole bit. And, listen, if you live in New York and you don't have kids, you don't have to have a Chevy Suburban. But you live in Avon, Connecticut, and you got 4 kids.
Yeah, so you drive.
That's what you drive. And so, you can't judge people that's what they need to cart 4 kids around, plus 2 adults and equipment and all that stuff,
you need the space.
So, people have often joked and said, hey, listen, if the media was all centered in, Kansas, they might have a different view of things. Right. And it's true because their lives are, we all reflect our lives. And, what's important to me may not be important to one of my viewers, but that doesn't mean it should be on the news.
Right. How about, so then when do you meet your wife? You've been with your wife a long time, right?
Yeah. So I met her in 2000. I met Kara in the summer of 2000.
And then where were you there?
We were both at, she'd just been hired at Channel 3 and I was at Channel 3.
So take me, I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. From Illinois, from Rockford, how do you get to Connecticut?
I went to Grand Rapids, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek.
Is that what do they call those people? Is that what do they call
No,
What do they call the people? Oopers? The people from the Upper Peninsula?
The UP.
UP, yeah.
So Michigan, if you're from Michigan, this is how you tell people, and I know you can't see it on the podcast,
yeah.
but you you hold up your hand like a mitten, right?
Right.
And you point to where you're from, and so and then just the Upper Peninsula,
right.
which is
the Oopers. The Oopers, they call them. Yeah.
So Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo's over here, Detroit's over here. And then you go way up here. Mackinac Island is here where we got engaged, and then the Upper Peninsula's up there. So, so I went there, and at the time, might be a little bit smaller now, but it was the 36th biggest market in the country. So it was a big jump from Rockford, which was the 139th.
Right.
And it was, I really enjoyed living in Michigan. I think Michigan's a great state. The thing I loved about Michigan was that everyone loves Michigan, right?
Yeah.
You come to Connecticut and everyone complains. I'm like, why are people complaining about this beautiful state, right? And so it took me a while to figure out. But in Michigan, because it's so gigantic, you can do everything you want in Michigan, right? You can drive 6 hours north, and you're still in Michigan. You have a few hours to go, right? Everyone loves Detroit. Everyone, they're very loyal to Michigan.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So, so I lived there for about 2 years, and I was a sports anchor for a while. Interviewed Dirk Jeter.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that was really cool. So looking back on it, it was cool. At the time, I didn't really think it was a big deal because he was just drafted from some high school kid was drafted by the Yankees. Like high school baseball kids get drafted.
Is he a Michigan guy?
He grew up in Kalamazoo.
Oh.
So he went to Kalamazoo. I believe it's Kalamazoo Central High School.
Okay.
And I think they had like a news conference, and I ended up going to that. And he had just signed or whatever. I don't even think that people at the time thought it was a big deal. He was good, but I don't think. Like I didn't save that story because I didn't think it was a big deal, and it wasn't anything special to me.
So you did that, and then is Kara there too?
Coincidentally, Kara also worked in that same market after I left.
Oh,
she worked at the NBC station. I worked at the CBS station, and so then I was sending out some stuff, and I had an agent at the time, I believe. And so I ended up getting 2 offers. One was at FSB in Hartford, and the other was in Cleveland. And I always tell people this with pride that I took the Hartford job because of the Hartford Whalers.
Oh.
Because I wanted to be back in New England, but I wasn't going to go to a city that didn't have a pro team.
I always get into sort of jokingly with friends online that are still like obsessed with the Whalers, and maybe I don't understand it because I'm not a huge sports guy, but it reminds me of like people waving at a parade that's long since passed.
Yeah, I mean, like I get it. I think the odds of them coming back are very, very slim. To be honest with you, I think it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a billionaire. It's going to take a billionaire to come forward and say, listen, I'm going to buy all this. And I'm going to help build a stadium.
And I'm going to put them in Hartford.
Yeah. Well, I think they would go to Hartford if they ever came back because, that's part of the whole thing.
Right. I mean, they still sell the jerseys. And,
and I think, they're like the 7th or 9th best-selling NHL merchandise. Yeah. But, it did. Hartford was a different place then when they had the Whalers. It was the 23rd biggest metro area in the country. The way that Nielsen puts it all together, Hartford and New Haven are considered one metro area.
Oh, I see.
So that the whole state is one, except for Fairfield County, which is part of New York. So, and that's how it works in television. And so Hartford has fallen from, it was 21 like around 1990. Then it fell to 23 when I started in 92. And it's now down to like 33. So part of it is people have moved out of Connecticut. Part of it is that these other one-time smaller markets like Las Vegas and Charlotte have just exploded with people.
Oh, I see.
So they're much bigger.
So you do that. So you come to WFSB.
Yep.
And what year is this?
That was 92.
92. And then where does Kara go?
Kara was she was in Michigan at that time.
And you don't know her?
No. She was in Michigan, and she later worked in Grand Rapids, and she worked in Charlottesville, Virginia, and then she went to. So she did a similar thing, smaller markets, and then up to Michigan, and then she came to at FSB. So I was hired at FSB, and then within a year, I was doing the morning news with a woman named Virginia Cha.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to the evening news where I worked with Gail, Janet, and Denise.
Oh, Gail King.
Gail King, yeah.
The Oprah Gail King.
Yeah. And then I became permanent co-anchors with both Denise and Gail in different shows. Janet left. And I worked with Mika Brzezinski for a while. She was my co-anchor in the morning for a little bit. And so it was fun.
And so you're doing that, but you're still a bachelor at that point.
Yeah, I was single.
No kids.
And then I met Kara. She came in 2000, and we became friends right away.
Did she come as a reporter?
She came as a reporter. Yeah, and then they had her fill in and anchoring and things like that.
And where's she from?
She's from outside Detroit.
Oh, so she's a Michigander.
So she's a Michigander. She grew up in Bloomfield Hills.
Oh, cool.
I'm sorry, West Bloomfield, Michigan. And her dad was from Rhode Island. That was her connection to New England.
Right, and she has a very interesting story about her dad. Right?
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Whole other podcast. Yeah.
We can talk
I'll have to have her on. Yeah, I remember she talked about it.
She wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
And then we kind of hit it off, and we got engaged in 2002. And then we met in 2000, engaged 2002. But the real turning point, I think, for us was 9/11. We were at 9/11 together.
Oh, down in New York.
Yeah.
I remember you were there.
Yeah. And then afterwards, after our shift was over, she and I would walk around the city together. And we just kind of it was heartbreaking then because, those first couple of days, you really thought that there were people trapped, under the rubble. It was impossible to actually think that everyone was just gone, right? We walked around to the firehouses and the whole bit, and we got engaged in 2002. We got married in 2003, and then our kids came along. And
you have 2 kids, right?
2007 and 2009.
Wow,
so they're in high school now.
So now, and then she's at Channel 3. You're at Channel 8.
Yeah, I was at Channel 3, obviously, as you know, for 28 years. And then, Denise died in 2019,
and she was your work wife.
She was like my sister.
Right.
It was devastating.
I have many of those. I work with all women here, and I have Jillian, who's my assistant, is like my work wife, my sister, like everything in one. And somebody that and I tell people this, like, you really can have platonic relationships with members of the opposite. I believe it. Totally. I don't think everyone can do it. I can do it. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's actually when you achieve it, in my view, it is such a pure relationship. It is so rewarding of a relationship, because there's no tension for any of that stuff. I can just be open with you. If you want to complain to her about your wife or or your spouse, you don't feel like you're trying to get something out of them for it. It's something very beautiful about that.
Well, with co-anchors, you're sort of like a unit, right? And she and I were together for so long. We would do dinners together and this, that, and the other thing. And we went through a lot. Her dad died, and we went through losses and successes, and so her death impacted me deeply.
Because she had a heart attack, right?
So
it was
sudden,
terrible, and that's so rare for a woman too, right? It doesn't.
It's actually much more. Heart disease is the leading cause of death for among women.
Oh, really? Oh, see, I don't even know, right?
And particularly, she appeared to be in shape and all that, but you just don't know, right? She was thinner, and
she looked like you wouldn't know.
And heart attack symptoms for women are different than men.
Sometimes they push women out of the emergency rooms, right? They say, "Oh, you have anxiety," and
something like that.
There's all kinds of studies on that, right?
Yeah, they get tired more, and then they have a heart attack. So and women are tougher than men. Right? They ignore a lot of those symptoms, and they're like, "Oh, I'm fine." Whereas like men, "Oh my God, my arm hurts. I gotta go to the hospital." And so, but it's the leading cause of death among women is heart disease.
Oh gosh.
So,
but that wrecked you, right? I mean, that was
it was really, really difficult. And then COVID came along. That night I had to announce her death in the news. And then we had the memorial. We had a private funeral. Then we had a memorial. And then a few months later was my 28th anniversary. I got fired that day.
Jesus.
So they called me in. They said, we're making some changes and you're done, essentially. And so
right, and you had to you had the show, everything.
Yeah, but it all worked out.
Right, and now you're at a great market, and you still have your show.
And our new, we just won the 6 o'clock news. So WTNH is the most watched 6 o'clock news in Connecticut.
And that's your thing.
And so I'm excited about that.
So as we wind down, just a couple more questions. What is the what do you think in terms of if folks want to be interested in journalism and build a journalism career, there's still folks doing that. What would you say is the best in terms of what's in today's market, and you want to get started? What was the best advice you'd give them?
Well, let's say you're not enrolled in anything yet. Follow some reputable news organizations on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. the ABC News, maybe the New York Times, things like that. And learn about news that way a little bit. Go to school for journalism.
Mhm.
It's
It's still important to get
still
the
important to learn how to do it the right
basics.
way. And you're going to find that there's so many people who are not doing it that way. And that's unfortunate. My kids will say to me, "Hey, did you see that story on TikTok?" So people are breaking stuff on TikTok now, and but you have to embrace those social media things. I don't have TikTok yet.
Yeah, I can't figure it
I
out.
don't think my kids want me on it. But news organizations do use it, and it's important, I think, to reach those younger viewers.
Right. So you think though a sort of a very traditional background is important as well, like
I do.
learning the ethics and
I don't necessarily think you have to major in journalism, but you can take journalism courses and major in history or something other, English or something like
Okay.
that. I mean, English is really important, and grammar, all those things.
And how about
history?
even could you? I mean, you could even practice. I mean, now with very little equipment, I mean, you could put your phone in a tripod and you could put a package together and then edit it on
Totally.
iMovie, and you could do the same quality that WTNH uses.
My kids, when they edit things, I'm amazed by their skills with it. I'm like, how'd you put that together?
Yeah, my son made a trailer to a movie. He's 9 years old.
Yeah.
With on his cheap 10-year-old laptop.
Yeah, you can do stuff like that, and so that's kind of like how the business is changing a little bit.
Right, because there's no barrier to entry. You don't need a studio. You don't need film. I can put that up. I can go on the street. I can interview. Now, of course, the issues become you are bound by a code of ethics.
Yeah.
Right, and you abide by that. I mean, there's all kinds of. I mean, you could take classes. You could teach a class on journalistic ethics, and that's an important thing.
You just don't know what's out there. I remember a few years ago, there was a tornado, right? And everyone's looking for the tornado video, the tornado picture. Who's got the funnel cloud? And somebody, I think, tagged us in social media. This is when I worked at a different place, and it went on the air, and it turned out to be from some file picture from Kansas or something like that. So Oklahoma. So you have to be careful what people put out there, and you have to verify, and that's why you'll often see us say, we have been unable to verify the source of this photo. Independent verification. Someone will send us something, and we trust that it's accurate, but we like to confirm it as well.
Right, because then you look a egg on your face.
There's fake stuff out there.
Yeah.
There is such thing as fake news.
Or right, there is fake news. That is true. Yes.
And it's not some of the things that others say is fake news is actual real news, but there is fake news out there, and you have to be careful about that.
Right. All right. So is to sort of wrap it up, I told you at the beginning that the name of this is "I'll Call My Guy."
Yeah.
So and guy is gender neutral, so guy can mean a woman or a man, and so if you could pick one, doesn't have to be one or two. Like, who is Dennis House's guy? Like, you need to call for whatever it is. You say, you need information for a story, and without revealing any sources, but who's give me a couple names of people that are what, he's my guy. I can call him.
Wouldn't that be revealing a source?
I guess that's true. What about a non-source guy? Who's one of your guy people that you like for?
Well, I mean, the person I call the most is my wife.
Your
Kara.
wife, okay.
I call her all the time as a sounding board for various things.
Do you run journalistic sort of things by her?
Well, we don't work together anymore,
right.
So I would never. But she, I mean, obviously, if I have something that's exclusive, I'm not going to lie to her. But she's bound, she wouldn't call.
Well, she's bound by the husband-wife. The husband-wife
call Channel 3 and say, "Hey, Dennis says this," whatever.
No, she's your wife, but your wife, your guy.
And I wouldn't do that for her either. So
yeah, but I mean, they can't They can't expect you not to talk to your wife. Yeah. I mean,
I have a lot of friends. I'm very blessed with having a lot of friends. Some in the business, some not. Some who are people who are also our sources,
right?
All right.
But nothing beats a wife, right? To be able to call and
she's
bounce
my
stuff
number
up.
one advisor.
She's number one guy.
She's the number one. Yeah.
All right, Kara. All right, so that's good. So
she's number one.
Does she can? Does she have a good sense like a woman's intuition, if you will?
She always knows what's right.
Right. You don't want to admit it. My wife's like that too.
When in doubt, I would call her.
Right, and she says to you, "I'm not so sure."
Yeah, and sometimes she'll be like, "You make the decision. Like, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? Whatever." Like, I don't know. I mean, then I pick 10 places, she says no to all of them.
Well, you know what the trick is? I'm going to give you a trick to wrap this up. So when you go out with Karen, she's like, I'm not sure. Because women sometimes, and again, I'm not being stereotyped, but this just happens. And I work with a whole office of women.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get them to make decisions on where to eat.
Sure.
So what you do is you get into the car. And she says, instead of saying to her, where do you want to go? And she's like, I'm not sure, whatever. And you say, honey, I've got a place selected for dinner. Guess where it is? And she's going to say, it's Brico. And you're like, exactly. And you drive right to Brico.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that.
Right. You do that, and then you know she'll agree with it, and she'll,
that's funny.
Yeah, it's good.
That's funny.
Dennis, thanks. Pleasure. I know your time is valuable. I enjoy working with you when it does come up, although I'm trying to keep my head down and out of the spotlight here.
I've appreciated our friendship over the years, Rich.
Yes,
so
I always step in shit from time to time, and then I wind up on your show trying to explain things away for clients. But for now, I'm just doing West Hartford divorces, so it's not as
we don't really do that on my show.
Yeah. Nothing like that. So thanks so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, appreciate it.
I appreciate it.